previous lecture, we had concentrated on the Rayleigh-Ridge method, and we had shown through two example problems that using the series representation of the solution, which is what we are always going to do throughout this course of this type, and choosing these functions phi I, which we had called as our global basis functions. So we choose our phi I's differently. There's no restriction on choosing the phi I to be of a particular type or of a different type. It depends on what is the particular application for which we are using this representation. That is going to decide what kind of phi I's we are going to use. So in the Rayleigh-Ridge method, we had shown that one choice of phi I's that we had done or taken was the polynomial type. That is, the phi I was a polynomial defined over the whole domain. And we saw that for the case of smooth distributed body forces for the axial bar problem, these phi I's did a very good job of approximating the solution to the problem. However, they failed when we had concentrated loads applied at points. In fact, they did a very bad job of approximating the derivatives which are for an engineer of prime interest. So we said that fine, these phi I's fail for this kind of a problems, and this set of problems where concentrated loads are applied or when we have material interfaces are of practical interest to an engineer. So to tackle that issue, we introduced a new set of phi I's, which were, again, one should remember that these are globally defined functions. So we said that let us take these points in the vicinity of a point of interest xi, and we'll make the phi I as this. This phi I was defined in such a way that it had a value 1 at the point xi, and at the two neighboring points, these are specified points that we have to define. At these two neighboring points, this phi I became 0, and everywhere else in the domain it was extended by the 0 value. So using these phi I's, which were the so-called piecewise linear hat functions, we could again form a series representation similar to what we had done earlier. This series representation one has to keep in mind. So from this series representation, we found that taking a two-term solution using appropriately placed points and defining the phi I's with respect to those points, we got the exact solution to the problem with a concentrated load. Great. So this, we said, was the motivation for using the finite element method. I am going to write it as an abbreviation as FEM. Now, one thing that we had consistently followed was we had followed the regime of the Rayleigh-Ridge approach. That is, we had minimized an energy functional to obtain the coefficients of the series solution. Here we are going to change track a little bit, and we are not going to always try to derive the sets of equations from the minimization of an energy functional, because in many of the engineering problems, energy functional or a corresponding functional may not exist. So there is no question of minimizing a functional. So we would like to follow a formulation which will always lead to the requisite set of equations for any problem of interest. And where does that come from? That comes from looking at the differential equation of the problem. So let us take again a model problem of this type. So here we have some distributed load Fx in the body and end load P, and again at x equal to 0 we have constrained the body, at x equal to L we have applied the end force. The body material of the body varies because this is no longer a uniform beam I have taken. It varies as a function of x as EAX. So if I wrote the differential equation corresponding to this bar, we have done this enough number of times already, it will be minus d dx of EA du dx is equal to f of x for all x's lying between 0 and L. Obviously, for any boundary value problem, I would like to reiterate that we have to specify boundary conditions also. So we will have at the end x equal to 0. Remember that we are only taking this as a specific example. This does not apply to all problems. We could take different boundary conditions at the two ends. And similarly, EA du dx at x equal to L is equal to P. So these are the boundary conditions for the model problem that we have taken here. Now, what we had done earlier, we had talked about the weighted residual approach. What was the idea of the weighted residual approach? The idea was that I take the differential equation of, in this case corresponding to the equilibrium of the bar, and move the right hand side to the left hand side to get minus d dx of EA du dx minus f of x is equal to 0. Then we take this whole expression on the left hand side, which is called the residue. This expression is called the residue, and multiply it by some weighting function w. This weighting function has to be an admissible function. So just to remember, there is something called admissibility. So both sides I am going to multiply it with w, and then I am going to integrate this expression from 0 to L, that is over the domain or over the length of the member, x is equal to 0 to L. Here also dx. So what we get is that this side essentially is equal to 0. So this is what we obtain. Then we had said that this is the weighted residual formulation that we started off with. Now look at this w here, this function w. Till now, in whatever we have done, we have taken w to be specifically equal to variation of u. Not anymore. We are simply going to take any w which is admissible, and admissibility we will have to define in a strict way later on. Now if I take w to have a representation of this type, let us say I am using the series solution that we have formed earlier, w to have a representation of this type, such that these functions chi I are not equal to the functions phi I that were used to represent the solution to the problem, then this formulation is called a Petrov-Galerkin formulation. So when w does not have the same representation as u, it is called a Petrov-Galerkin approach. And we see here again, we had already highlighted these issues in the previous lectures. Note that in this problem, the second derivative of u is involved in the integral, while only w is involved in the integral. So in defining these functions for u and w, there is a disparity. All we need for these integrals to be finite is that the functions phi should be smooth enough to ensure that the second derivative of u is finite, and similarly for w we need the functions chi I to be smooth enough such that w itself is defined, that is the integral is finite. Now what we will do is we can go ahead and integrate by parts the weighted residual form that we have obtained. We will integrate by parts once, and we will see why we will do that. So if you integrate by parts once, you will end up getting integral x is equal to 0 to L EA du dx dw dx is equal to integral 0 to L fw dx plus I will have EA du dx into w evaluated at whole thing evaluated at x equal to L minus EA du dx into w whole thing evaluated at x equal to 0. So here we have two terms which correspond to the boundary terms. At the boundary x equal to L, this one corresponds to a boundary term at the boundary x equal to 0. So you see that naturally in this formulation, by just doing integration by parts once, the boundary conditions have come into our formulation. And if you remember what we called this formulation earlier, this was called the weak form. Why was it called the weak form? Because you see that now we have weakened the derivative requirement for u. That is, only the first derivative of u is sitting in our integral on the left hand side, and we have passed that one derivative, one extra derivative of u to w. So both u and w have their first derivatives sitting in the expression on the left hand side. Another nice thing of this formulation is that here if you look at these boundary terms, so what do we have from the boundary terms? In the boundary terms, you see that if I look at this part, EA du dx, and I'll put this w a little apart. Let's take at the point x equal to 0 or L. Then let us look at this part of the boundary term. What does this part specify? This specifies a force, an axial force or flux, it is called, term which is specified at the boundary. Now this is sometimes given other names. It is called Neumann or natural. So at a boundary, either this force or the flux term is specified, and that is called a Neumann or a natural boundary condition. Why is it called natural? Because this term naturally appears in the weak formulation that we have obtained. Now let us look at the second part. What about this part? W. This part W is corresponding to u, because what happens at an end where u is specified, the displacement u is specified, then at that end, remember we had talked about admissibility of the W. So If u is specified at that end, then w has to be equal to 0 at that end. So this set of conditions are called Dirichlet essential or displacement boundary conditions. Note that at a particular end, both these things cannot be specified. It is either or. It is either the force is given at the end or the displacement is specified at the end, which means if the displacement is specified, w has to be 0 at that end. So you see that out of our formulation, we have obtained the admissible set of boundary conditions that can be applied at an end of the member. We cannot have any other type of boundary condition that we wish. These are the only types of boundary conditions that we can apply. Okay. So for our model problem, if we go back, then we end up getting an expression of this form. EA du dx dw dx dx is equal to integral x is equal to 0 to L f w dx plus the part at the end x equal to L. At the end x equal to L, EA du dx is equal to P. So we will put that P into W evaluated at the end x equal to L. Now minus EA du dx into W at the point x equal to 0. But at x equal to 0, our U is specified. So in that case, at x equal to 0, so I will put it and then EA du dx W at x equal to 0. But you note that at this end, since U is specified, W is equal to 0. So this whole term goes off. So we are left with essentially this part. So for our model problem, this is the weak formulation. Now let us again introduce some more finite element parlance. U in general in the finite element connotation is called the trial function. And W is called the test function. Note further that if we took W is equal to the variation of U, we will get exactly the variational formulation for this model problem that we would have obtained using the minimization of the functional. Note however that this is a very special problem where this is true, that is the weak form with W equal to delta U is the same as the variational formulation. It is not true in many problems of interest. Okay, so now what do we do? So now we said that we have to obtain a series representation for U. So we will say this is an approximation for U of x. So to do that, let us go and introduce some more terminologies. So what we'll do first is, let's take the domain with the point x equal to 0 as one extremity, x equal to L as another extremity. And in this domain, we are going to add additional points. Let's say we have added in this case 4 more points. So totally, and we have, and we are going to give these points some names. This point will be the point x1, this point will be the point x2, this point will be x3, x4, x5, and here this will be called x6. In the same way, we can add endpoints. So here we have added 6, we could add endpoints in the domain. Now, these points are given certain names in the finite element terminology. These points are called nodes. And the interval in between two consecutive points is called an element. So this will be an element. So what do we have is, so this is an element, this is an element, this is an element. So here if you see, we have 5 elements. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 elements we have. And 6 nodes. This set of nodes and elements together forms the mesh. This is a geometrical exercise that one has to do even before we start doing any calculations. Meshing is a part which is an integral part of any finite element computations, and this is a precursor to any solution process that we take. So we have formed a mesh for our bar that we have taken. Now, for this mesh, what we'll do is, so again I'll draw the mesh. Now for this mesh, if you remember, in the last class we had introduced these functions phi, which were somehow defined with respect to points. So here again we are going to define these functions phi. So how are we going to define these functions phi? It is, this will be my function phi1 of x, such that it takes a value 1 at the point x1, and at all other points x2, x3, x4, x5, x6 it is equal to 0. So if you see this function, it is linear in the region x1 to x2 and it is 0 everywhere else. Okay, one more thing I would like to introduce is that these elements should be given a name. So these elements are going to be given names like this. Element I is given by this interval, or I could call it by omega I, is the set of all points lying between xi and xi plus 1. So in another words, this function phi1, if you see, it is non-zero in element 1 and 0 in all other elements. Next is, we are going to introduce the next function, phi2. So phi2 will be 1 at the point x equal to 2, x2, and 0 at the point x1 and all other points. So this is how we define phi2. Similarly, we'll go back and define phi3. Phi3 will be again a function which is 1 at the point x3 and 0 at all other points. Again we can define phi4. And then we can define phi5, and finally we can define phi6. So this is phi5 and this is phi6. So if you see that we had 6 nodes in our mesh, and corresponding to the 6 nodes, we have defined these 6 functions phi I. So we get functions phi 1 of x to phi 6 of x. So next, let us represent our u six of x is equal to sum of I equal to 1 to 6 ui phi I of x. Again, let me reiterate that these phi i's are called the global basis functions. Now, what we are going to do further is that we are going to take w to be of the same form as the u. That is, w that we use in our weak formulation will also be of this type, that is, it's represented in terms of the same global basis functions. In fact, this is what we will do throughout this course. When in the weak formulation or in our weighted residual formulation, we use w to have the same representation as the u, that is, it's represented in terms of the same basis functions, then that formulation is called the Galerkin formulation. So what we are going to do throughout this course is use the Galerkin formulation. Now, we have this representation for the u and for the w. Now the question is, we need to find these coefficients ui. Just like we did earlier, same question arises again. So how do we find the coefficients ui? So we put this representation back in our weak formulation. So we will have x is equal to 0 to L EA u6 prime, we'll call it w6 prime dx is equal to integral x is equal to 0 to L f w6 dx plus p into w6 evaluated at x equal to L. So this formulation should give us sufficient number of equations to find the coefficients of u6, that is u1 to u6. Okay, so now what do we do? Since this w is a weight function, it's an admissible function that we have taken. It could be anything provided it satisfies the geometric conditions at the ends. That is, these wi's that we had used in the representation of w6 they can be chosen according to our wish. So what we'll do is we'll take a choice for w6x to be equal to phi I of x. Okay. So if we take a choice for this w6x to be phi I of x, we put it back in this expression. That is, in this series representation for w6, we take all the w's equal to 0 excepting wi, which is set to a value 1. So here in this representation, replacing it, we get EA u6 prime phi x prime, this is equal to integral of 0 to L f phi dx plus p phi evaluated at the point x equal to L. So this way we can choose w6 equal to phi 1, put it in this expression, we'll get one equation. Put w6 equal to phi 2, put it in this expression, we get the second equation. And so on, we can get 6 equations by putting phi I in the expression for I equal to 1, 2 up to 6. Okay. Now let us further go and put the expression for u6 in our expressions for the equation corresponding to phi I. So if I put the expression for u6, I can write it like this. This will be j. Let's put it as j is equal to 1 to 6 uj integral of x is equal to 0 to L EA phi j prime phi I prime. This is equal to integral x is equal to 0 to L f phi I dx plus p phi I evaluated at x equal to L. So you see, by substituting the expression for u6 in our weak formulation and using w6 is equal to phi I, we get equation, we get the ith equation in terms of these j unknown coefficients uj. So we get 6 equations in terms of six unknown uj, and these are a set of simultaneous equations. These are algebraic equations. Okay. Next game that we are going to play is, you see that these phi i's are defined over the whole domain. So what we can do is, this domain, by our construction, we have partitioned the domain into elements. Okay, so elements given by these nodes x1 to x6 and elements I1, I2, I3, I4, I5. So what we can do is that these integrals that we have from the weak formulation, we can break them up into sum of integrals over each of these elements, because integral from x equal to 0 to L of any expression dx is equal to integral, in our case, of x1 to x6 of that expression dx, which we can write as sum over L going from 1 to 6 integral x L to x L plus 1. Sorry, this should not be 6, this should be 5. 5. So xl to xl plus 1, that is the two extremities of the lth element and the same expression dx. This is basic integral integrations that we have learnt in our earlier classes. So this I can do. So this kind of a partitioning of the integral, we are going to apply to our expression that we have derived. So what do we get? We will get sum over L is equal to 1 to 5, okay, summation over j is equal to 1 to 6 uj integral x L to x L plus 1 phi j prime phi I prime dx is equal to summation over L going from 1 to 5 integral xl to xl plus 1 f phi dx plus p phi evaluated at the point x is equal to L or the point xx. Okay. So now what do we have? This integral we have broken into these partitions over these elements. Now if you look at it as such, we can write this set of 6 equations as a matrix which is of size 6 by 6, matrix K of size 6 by 6 into a vector U which is of size 6 by 1 is equal to a vector F. Now where does this come from? This matrix comes from this expression under the integral obtained over the whole domain. What are these U's? U's are the entries or the elements of this vector U are nothing but these coefficients Uj. This matrix, as we had introduced earlier, is given a name. It is called the global stiffness matrix. This vector is called the displacement vector. And this vector is called the load vector. So if I now want to go and find out what are the entries of the stiffness matrix, it is very simple. Looking at this expression here, what do we have? We have I rows, which is 6 rows and 6 columns. Where do the rows come from? Rows come from by substituting W with phi I. W equal to phi I gives us the ith row, and the jth column of the ith row comes out of these phi j. So it's very simple to look at Kij. What is Kij equal to? It is summation over L is equal to 1 to 5, that is over these 5 elements, integral of xl to xl plus 1 Ea. Ea is a function of x, we should remember, phi j prime phi I prime dx. What is the entry of the load vector F? So we will get Fi is equal to integral summation from L equal to 1 to 5 integral xl to xl plus 1 f phi I dx plus p phi I evaluated at x equal to L. Okay, so let's now look at this ijth entry carefully. So Kij corresponds to the ith row and jth column. Now, one very important feature of the finite element method is that this matrix K is not fully populated. What does it mean, not fully populated? It means that many of the entries of the K matrix are going to be 0. That is, K is sparse. Sparsity of a matrix has its own advantages as far as the numerical calculations are concerned. Another thing that you should note is that if I go to the jth row and the ith column, for the jth row and the ith column, I will have Kji is equal to summation integral of this expression of Ea phi I prime phi j prime. So you see that in this case Kij is equal to Kji. This is another very important property of these matrices. This matrix K is said to be symmetric. Okay, so let's now again go back to the ith equation. So we have Kij is equal to integral summation L is equal to 1 to 5 xl to xl plus 1 Ea phi j prime phi I prime dx. Now, one simple question. Tell me that what are the elements in which phi I is non-zero. So phi I, if I go and draw the mesh, I will not draw the full mesh. If you remember, here is node I, here is I minus 1, here is I minus 2. Okay, this is node I plus 1, this is node I plus 2. So if I look at phi I is non-zero in only which elements? In only elements I minus 1 and in element I. So phi I is non-zero only in these two elements, which is the elements I minus 1 and element I. Fine. So what does it tell me? That out of this summation over all the L's, there will be some of these elements out of which the contribution to this integral is going to be 0. So what we'll have is Kij will be equal to integral, as we had done there, x I minus 1 to xi Ea phi j prime phi I prime dx plus integral xi to xi plus 1 Ea phi j prime phi I prime dx. So if I highlight this, this is going to be element contribution coming out of element I minus 1. This will be the second part, will be contribution coming out of element I out of element I. So you see that these are the only two elements which are going to contribute to the entries of the ith row, that is corresponding to the weight function phi I. This is one observation that we have made. Okay. Now the other question is, fine, so the integral over the whole domain is now restricted to this integral over the two elements over which phi I is non-zero. Next, the question is that you look at these j's, these phi j's. Now, which of these phi j's are non-zero in the elements I minus 1 and I? So, which of the phi j's are non-zero in elements I minus 1 and I? Again, let us draw the picture that we had made earlier. So here is my node I, here is node I plus 1, here is node I plus 2, here is node I minus 1, and here is node I minus 2. So if you look, if you plot these figures for the phi i's, so this is going to be phi I. I am looking at only these two elements, this element and this element, and I would like to know which of the phi i's are non-zero in these two elements. So one phi which is non-zero is certainly phi I. The other phi which is non-zero here is this guy. this is phi I minus 1, and another phi which is non-zero here is phi I plus 1. You see that phi I minus 1, phi I and phi I plus 1 are the only global basis functions which are non-zero in this element, which is element I minus 1, and element I. Okay, that is, if I go and say that I want to chop this off here, the domain, then you see that it's quite clear that phi I minus 1, phi I and phi I plus 1 are the only ones which are non-zero in this chopped block. So what it tells us that out of all the fj's, remember that here we had 6 fj's, only the 3 fj's which are equal to which are for j equal to I minus 1, j equal to I and j equal to I plus 1 are non-zero in this integration range. Okay, so what we have, so to make things clear, we will say that only for the ith equation k I minus 1, that is for the ith row, the ith minus 1 column is going to be equal to x I minus 1 to xi Ea phi I prime phi I minus 1 prime dx. Okay. You see one thing, that for the other part, that is for the element I, that is for integral xi to xi plus 1, this function phi I minus 1 is 0, so that part disappears. That's why we have not written that. Similarly, for the ith equation, the ith, the diagonal entry, will be given as, since phi I is non-zero in both elements I minus 1 and I, so we'll get Ea phi I prime squared dx plus integral xi to xi plus 1 Ea phi I prime squared dx. Similarly, ki I plus 1 is equal to integral. So if you see here, phi I plus 1, that is for j equal to I plus 1, phi I plus 1 is 0 in the element I minus 1. So that part is not going to contribute to this integral, even though phi I is not 0, because the product is 0. So what we'll have is integral xi to xi plus 1 Ea phi I plus 1 prime phi I prime dx. These are the only 3 entries, column entries of the ith row, which are going to be non-zero. So if I write that matrix, what will I get? So here is the 6 by 6 matrix, 1, 2, 3. Maybe I'll have to extend it further. So in that matrix, if I go and see, what will happen is that for the first row, only the first column and the second column are going to be non-zero. For the second row, the first column, that is the I minus 1th column, the ith column and the I plus 1th column are going to be non-zero. Everything else is going to be 0. For the third row, since it's the third row, so the second column, that is I minus 1th column, ith column and I plus 1th column are going to be non-zero. For the fourth one, now you will have the third, fourth, and the fifth. For the fifth one, you will have the fourth, fifth, and the sixth. And for the sixth one, you will have the fifth and the sixth. So you see that this is a matrix, if you look at it, which has non-zero entries in only this small band. So this is called a banded matrix. This is another very important feature of the finite element method, that the stiffness matrix that you get in the finite element method is generally of this form, where you will have the diagonal entries and some elements in the neighborhood of the diagonal non-zero, and everything else is zero. These are all zero entries. Okay. So this is another very important aspect of the finite element method that we should be aware of. Okay, so now where are we? So if you see that the ith equation, again reiterate, will have the I minus 1, I, and the I plus 1th columns as non-zero. Remember that here we are talking in terms of integrals of these phi's. Now this is all fine as far as working on paper is concerned. So first of all, let us see how we would like to bring it to a form which is computationally effective. That is a form which the computer can understand. So first thing is, we would like to define these functions phi of x. So if I draw it here, here is I, here is I minus 1, here is I plus 1. This is what my phi of x is, such that it is 1 at the point xi. So what we will get as a definition of phi of x, it will be equal to x minus xi minus 1 divided by h of element I minus 1 for xi minus 1 less than equal to x is less than equal to xi, and it is equal to xi plus 1 minus x divided by hi for xi less than equal to x than equal to xi plus 1. What do we mean by this hi minus 1 and hi? So hi minus 1 is equal to xi minus xi minus 1. This is equal to the size of element I minus 1. Similarly, hi is equal to xi plus 1 minus xi, which is the size of the element I. So here comes another notation that we will come across in the finite element method, that for all the elements in the domain, so if this is the element, we will have a corresponding size hi. This is called the element size or local mesh size. We can take the simplest possible case where all these elements are of the same length, that is of the same size. Then what will happen? Hi will be equal to h, which will be equal to the length of the whole domain divided by the number of elements. So in this case, for example, if I take the 5 element mesh, in that case H will be equal to L by 5. When the mesh consists of elements of the same size, then it is called a uniform mesh. So we have defined the mesh again, and we have defined the phi's or the functions phi's over this mesh. So let us now stop here for the time being and recap as to what we have done in this lecture. In this lecture, we have introduced the weighted residual formulation, from which we obtained the weak formulation for the model problems of interest, and from which we went to the specific, which is the Galerkin form. And for this Galerkin form, we introduced these global basis functions, which were piecewise linears. And in terms of these global basis functions, we defined the approximation. Then we said how to obtain the equations, the requisite number of equations to obtain the coefficients which are sitting in the approximation. To close this part, I would like to reiterate another part, another very important point, which, if you look at this formulation, just let us look at the right hand side only, then you see that in this expression, in this integral, the first derivative of u and the first derivative of w are sitting. So for this integral to be finite, this first derivative of u and the first derivative of w have to be defined. Okay, defined means that these derivatives can do this kind of a thing, that is, they can jump at points. I have taken this inside, no, they can jump at points, which means that these functions, the u and the w, can have kinks. That is the reason why we have used this kind of basis functions, and this kind of basis functions are called C0 functions. In the next lecture, what we'll do is we'll take this further and come down to equations defined at the elemental level, and we talk of how to form these equations, assemble them, that is, add them together to form the global equations.